Hello everyone. Last episode we talked about the Reconquista as part of the series of wars we also call the Crusades. And to pick up where we left off in the last episode, by the end of the 15th century, the Spanish had accomplished their centuries-long struggle to establish Christian-led rule throughout the Iberian Peninsula. And the thing to note is that Christopher Columbus was there to see it. The Genoese Italian sailor who supposedly discovered America, but in actuality died believing he found Asia, or at least some strange territories off of Asia. The very Christopher Columbus in which the United States capital is named after, Washington, D.C. D.C. as in District of Columbia. Columbia being the Latinized form of Columbus. Columbia is also one of the personifications of the United States next to Uncle Sam and Lady Liberty. Now, I often see in various texts where Christopher Columbus is referred to as an explorer, which is true. He wanted to explore new ways to finance yet another crusade. Now, other historians and other texts refer to the fact that Columbus had a thirst for knowledge and curiosity, which is also totally true. He really wanted to know where the money was at so he could hire more troops and engage in another war to retake Jerusalem. Now, the gold that would eventually be discovered in the American hemisphere, that money was not the end goal in itself. The wealth from the American hemisphere was merely a means to the end being an ultimate crusade to finally retake the former Christian lands. This is something Columbus states himself. In his letters and in his will, he believed that his discovery, what he believed to be Asia, was part of a series of apocalyptic events in which the Reconquista in Iberia was merely one of many subsequent steps. And Columbus was a deeply, deeply religious man. He envisioned the spiritual conquest of Islam and Muslims. He envisioned the liberation of Jerusalem and its return into Christian hands. The end of the Reconquista caused Columbus to believe that the end days were near, that Christ's return was imminent, and Columbus merely had to help this inevitable destiny along. Columbus was there at the end of the Reconquista. He saw the Spanish monarchs of King Ferdinand and Queen Isabella make their triumphant procession into the final city of Granada. They were there in 1492 to mark the city's surrender, the final city to cave into Christian rule. Now, to put ourselves in the mentality of Christopher Columbus, there witnessing the end of the Reconquista, for him it was natural to think that this would keep going. This process of Christian conquest would just keeps expanding throughout the world. And in fact, that's exactly how Columbus approaches the Spanish monarchy, essentially asking the Spanish monarchs, why not keep this going? Why stop here? Why not claim all the lands for Christ? And so Christopher Columbus sells the idea of a global crusade to the Spanish monarchs. All he's asking for is their financing, their sponsorship. In fact, we could see an entry from his own logbook in which he reveals this mentality to us. On the 2nd of January in the year 1492, Christopher Columbus wrote, quote, "When your highnesses had concluded their war with the Moors who reigned in Europe, I saw your highnesses' banners victoriously raised on the towers of the Alhambra, the citadel of that city, and the Moorish king come out of the city gates and kiss the hands of your highnesses, and the prince, my lord. And later in the same month, your highnesses decided to send me, Christopher Columbus, to see those parts of India and the princes and peoples of these lands, and consider the best means for their conversion. Your highnesses commanded me to go with an adequate fleet to those parts of India." Now, as I said, Columbus was an extremely religious man. And we could see his intense religious devotion in one of the names he adopted for himself. In fact, while the Latinized form of Columbus's last name is Columbia, he Latinized his first name as Christopherens. which translates to Christ bearer. And as I mentioned, he believed that the second coming of Christ was imminent, that the apocalypse was coming. The end days were here. And he believed that the success of the Spanish Crusade in the West was a sign, an omen of this future glorious destiny for Christianity. And in fact, one historian argues that this apocalyptic worldview of Christopher Columbus was partially influenced by the culture and literature around him, particularly Dante's The Divine Comedy, which was written in the 14th century. The Divine Comedy narrates Dante's journey through the 9 stages of hell, including limbo, lust, gluttony, greed, wrath, heresy, violence, fraud, and treachery. But it also details his journey through purgatory and eventually the 7 spheres of heaven itself, including the moon for those inconstant, Mercury for the ambitious, Venus for the lovers, the sun for the wise, Mars for crusaders or warriors of faith, Jupiter for just rulers, Saturn for those contemplative thinkers, the fixed stars defined by faith, hope, and love, but also the primum mobile, the realm of angels, the last point of what we might call corporeal reality, before finally reaching the realm of God himself, what was known as the Empyrean. Now, Dante was an Italian from Florence, and Columbus was an Italian from Genoa. Although Dante died about 130 years before Columbus lived, they shared a similar concept of the cosmos, in which the idea existed that time was finite, and human history had a beginning and it would also have an end. And historians argue that Columbus used Dante's Divine Comedy as a means to understand his own life and his own place in the world and his own sense of ambition and purpose in life. For Columbus, as well as Dante in the Divine Comedy, they both believed that heaven, paradise, was a real place that could be found. It was a real location which existed somewhere out there in the world. For Columbus, it was more of a when heaven becomes a real place. But reaching this physical location required a spiritual journey as well as a physical journey. For Dante, traveling through these realms of existence of hell, purgatory, and heaven was a spiritual as well as physical journey. It was a pilgrimage across spiritual and physical realities. And in the Christian tradition, you do see this sense of pilgrimage that Dante's work embodied, such as a physical journey that becomes a spiritual journey, from darkness to light, from ignorance to knowledge. Moreover, Columbus's sense of destiny that he had to go out and travel the world just as Dante had to travel through various realms was also informed through classical literature, particularly one of the most well-known epic poems, that is the Aeneid. Now, we've covered the Aeneid in a previous episode. That is, the phrase annuit coeptus evoked a sense of destiny and new beginnings in the United States, but long before that, the Aeneid had been influencing travelers for centuries. The idea of a lone traveler who forms a community that becomes an empire was influential for the USA, but it was also influential centuries earlier to Christopher Columbus himself. The Spanish imperial tradition drew from multiple influences: the Bible, imperial Rome, but also its unique Crusading tradition of the Reconquista. Now, as I briefly touched upon in the last episode, for the Spaniards who took part in the Reconquista, the ideal of retaking Jerusalem was blurred and mixed with the idea of retaking the rest of the peninsula. In fact, the Spaniards had an intense belief that Jerusalem could be resurrected. Resurrected in this instance means recaptured by the Christians. They believed in this optimistic scenario because they had just proven it true in their own land. They had successfully reestablished their own religion's control over the entire territory, and they also believed that this was possible in the Middle East. Just as how Spain rose from the ashes, they believed that Jerusalem could be next. In fact, part of Columbus's belief that he was a special divine agent reflected a larger cultural trend in Spain, the so-called belief in the last world emperor. That is between the 15th and 16th centuries. They believed a final king would gain political control. They also believed that this final world emperor would fight the Antichrist, and that this final world emperor would also reestablish control over Jerusalem and the broader Holy Land. This, of course, was a narrative that was helped by political rulers themselves. For example, in the late 14th century, Peter of Aragon argued that the last world emperor would be a future king of Aragon. As the Reconquista was drawing to close, these prophecies became even more intense and more widespread. This idea of impending end days, in which the Reconquista was merely the first stage in the end process for humanity, was widely discussed and talked about at the end of the 15th century. And it was from this discourse, this culture, this manner of thinking and speaking which informed Christopher Columbus and influenced his worldview and outlook. However, to return to a point made earlier, Columbus drew from deeper legacies in the Western tradition. Columbus was influenced not only by Dante's journey through hell, purgatory, and heaven, but also the journey of Aeneas, from the burning embers of Troy to the shores of Italy. But let's not also forget the Apostle Paul, who journeyed throughout the Roman Empire and established churches. Columbus cast his journey to the New World as one of the many pilgrimages in the Western tradition. Columbus portrayed himself as an agent who would himself help create a new era with a new spiritual empire leading the way.